Today's conversation is about spiritual psychosis, dissociation, and other red flags on your spiritual journey. And as we do on the Playground podcast, I love to give you a disclaimer that sometimes what we talk about is uncomfortable. It can be sensitive. It can make you feel some type of way. So I highly recommend that you take care of yourself as we have this conversation, especially because the topic of spiritual psychosis and dissociation, sometimes you don't actually understand that you either have gone through this or you may have been adjacently going through it or you're currently in it. So sometimes it can feel just like a lot of jarring information all at once. So I highly recommend that you take deep breaths with me, you ground yourself, and you pause and stop listening at any point when you need to. Okay, so take notes, drink tea, take care of yourself, and let's get into it. If we don't know each other already, hello, I'm Shanila Sattar. I'm the founder of AlwaysPlay Studios, the Healing Arts Academy, and Flow Breathwork Facilitator training. I'm an author of a book called Breathe, and of course, I host this podcast called The Playground, which is all about spiritual exploration, self-development, intuitive entrepreneurship, and really just getting to know ourselves better. 100% subscribe to the podcast if you're not already subscribed, and of course share it with your friends, and let's talk spiritual psychosis. So this phrase, have you ever heard it before? Spiritual psychosis? I feel like I'm seeing it pop up a lot more nowadays online and social media, on TikTok and things like that. This word is like a little bit more prominent than it was before, and I think I've only been privy to spiritual psychosis or just even that term for about 4 or 5 years. I don't think I knew what to call it before that. But as this world of healing and spirituality has kind of developed over the years and people are sharing more information with each other, we are very clear about what spiritual psychosis is nowadays. And it's actually something that a lot of people experience without knowing that they're experiencing it, or they didn't know that they experienced it when they experienced it, or they're still actually experiencing it without an awareness that that's what's happening for them. And one thing that a lot of people don't know is that it's actually a very common occurrence that happens when you're in self-exploration. So whether you want to call it your spiritual journey or your healing journey, your personal development, your inner work, your inner child, like we all have this creative language for just like learning about ourselves and like doing better for ourselves. We all have different language. For me, it's self-exploration. It just makes me feel like I have freedom to not like label it like, oh, this is spiritual or this is personal development. Like for me, it just has that freedom. But whatever it is that you call yourself on this journey that we're on, it's a very common thing that a lot of people experience, but they just are not aware that they're experiencing it. So let me define for you what spiritual psychosis can actually feel like or look like. It's basically when you start to believe things with every single fiber and every single bone in your body without any room for other interpretations. And part of this happens when you start to heal or you start to doing a lot of self-development work. Your life and your worldview changes really fast. And especially if you're diving into the work, you're like, yes, I need to go to therapy, or I am doing somatic work, I'm doing breath work, I'm doing this, I am journaling, and you're putting in an intentional effort into that, things are going to shift very, very fast. Okay. Maybe your life doesn't change very fast, but I'm talking about internally, right? So this is like your worldview. So your ideas, your perception of yourselves, your perceptions of others, your interpersonal relationships, the way that you view yourself in those relationships, everything is rapidly shifting. So you might start to question a lot of different things. You're like, oh my gosh, have I been existing in a patriarchy? Oh my gosh, have I been existing in an abusive friendship? Oh my gosh, am I existing in a system that is like this? Am I right? Like all of these questions start to kind of like inundate you. And for a lot of people, sometimes you've been thinking about these things. So it's not like such a jarring experiencing to be like, oh my God, oppression, but like sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't understand this. That's what I was going in, like that's where I was living from. And I was in a society like this. I didn't understand that. So maybe you didn't have the education or you were just like blissfully unaware, it doesn't really matter like for why. But when you start to have these awareness of like, oh my gosh, things can feel really jarring, right? Like it's all of this awareness all at once. Now, one thing about your brain, and I'm just oversimplifying this, is that your brain needs and seeks an anchor. It needs an anchor. It needs something to latch onto. So if you have latched onto something, without knowing it, and I'm not saying it in like a dependent way, I'm saying like, yeah, you just latch onto your worldview. You're like, this is the world that I live in, and this is my belief systems, this is my thoughts, this is my attitudes, and that's what I'm latching onto. And all of a sudden you're like, none of this was true. Everything is fake, and everything is like, everybody lied to me, right? Like all of these different things. Your brain is essentially seeking another anchor. So we start to latch onto things like archetypal work, like astrology, human design, personality quizzes, and similar things, because it's just like, oh my gosh, I don't understand myself. I don't understand the world. So let me find the quickest and easiest and the shortest path to something that I can latch onto. So if it's like, oh, okay, I'm going through it because I'm going through a heartbreak, and you just don't want to understand like heartbreak, and so you try to find the reason and the lesson for your heartbreak in your natal chart. You start to say like, okay, like this is what I'm supposed to experience because this is what's happening, in my transit right now, or this is my human design. I'm not supposed to have love. And so that's just the reason. And like, I'm being dramatic here, but you get it, right? Like we try to make a lot of sense from archetypal work, which like, don't come from me. I think there's a lot of value in having things that are, resources and tools that help you develop a deeper understanding of yourselves. I think these are beautiful tools to have. I'm somebody who created the healer archetypes, and it's like an amazing tool for you to understand what type of healer you are. But you can still do some introspection work on yourself to learn those things about yourself without like needing a quiz or needing a personality, assessment, or needing somebody else to tell it to you. But I digress. This is basically when your worldview is changing so fast and so quick, you basically just need something to latch onto. You need an anchor. Neurologically, your mind is trying to make sense of like, yeah, we used to believe this, and now we don't have something else to believe. And so I'm just searching. I'm searching. Okay, so take a nice deep breath. Inhale and exhale. Take care of yourself while we're having this conversation, okay? Because oftentimes in spiritual psychosis, it doesn't start off by something super dramatic, right? It's not like doing something so dramatic. It just starts with my worldview is changing, and I need something to explain to my subconscious and to my conscious mind, like what's going on. And I'm going to seek the nearest and closest possible answer, right? And sometimes it's like, oh, an astrology, oh, a quiz. And it starts up very innocent, right? Because archetypal work is amazing. It gives you so much context about yourself. It opens you up to a way to think about yourself and about other people. And sometimes having a label or an identity can really be empowering, So if you're like, yeah, I'm a Capricorn, or yeah, I'm a Pisces, or my moon is over here, like, okay, cool. If that's empowering for you, then do your thing, okay? But where it starts to become a psychosis is that the things that you're associating and attaching to are sometimes really, really wild, right? And collectively, we went through a spiritual psychosis when COVID started to happen, right? So when the pandemic started to happen, all of us didn't have the answer. None of us, like, unless you're like in the deep, deep no, like most of us, like regular average people, like we don't actually know like the reason for COVID or the reason for a pandemic or the reason this and that. And so this is where you start to have all these different people, start to talk about conspiracies and start to talk about the aliens and start to talk about the bigger spiritual meaning and talk about really wild ideas. Sometimes it's like, all right, like let's investigate a conspiracy and let's investigate a little bit of this type of thought. But then like when you go too far down the pipeline, you're really separating yourself from the truth of what is happening and the reality, the tangible reality of what's happening, and some story that may or may not be real or true. But your brain just attaches to that. And this is where we saw a lot of healers and healing arts practitioners during 2020 go into the conspiracy to alt-right pipeline. These people? Yeah, you went to the alt-right pipeline. Basically, it started off being like, yes, there's this alien race who is coming to like take off people from the earth and all these different things. And I'm not here to like, storytell around that. You can investigate this by yourselves, but there's all these conspiracy theories that started to come out. And it's like, yeah, because us as people, we don't have the answer. So our brains and our energies are wanting to latch onto like a reasonable explanation. And we're like, yes, this is the government, and this is a control tool, and this is about taking away your agency, and this is about this thing or that thing. And I don't really know if I can follow you along too far down that path, as my uncle is dying of COVID and has died of COVID several years ago, and many family members have, and many elders in my community who are not in a Western society with the same types of tools and the luxuries to say that this was an alien force who came to do this and that. I don't know if I follow you. And I don't know if I follow you if, my friends are the doctors who are on the front lines, who are coming home after seeing so many people die in hospital beds, and the light that is diminishing from their eyes. I'm not sure if I follow you on that line of thought, right? And so there is a collective dissociation that I'm using as an example around 2020, where there's all of these different things that happen, and some people just really detached, right? There's like, your body's like, I don't fucking know what's happening. I have no reasonable exploration. It could be the government. It could be this thing. It could be there's so many different things, and maybe it's an overlap of many different things. But then you start to believe like this thing, right? Like this thing is the true answer, and there's no other variations of this answer. And so your brain has now anchored to that thought. So this is where that spiritual psychosis starts to come. It's that you're not open to any other kind of thought, and you're kind of going down a really wild path that has a lot of white supremacy at the undertones of the path that you're following, but you can't see it, right? A lot of the alien language, a lot of the starseed language, a lot of the, outer body language is a form of dissociation. So part of what we started to talk about in this podcast, where I said, we're talking about spiritual psychosis, we're talking about dissociation, and we're talking about red flags, right? And dissociation is a natural, normal way that a lot of us use as coping mechanism, right? So we dissociate it in a lot of different ways, and different people have different preferences, different vices. So some people will overwork, that's a form of dissociation. Some people will use drugs, sex, alcohol. Some people will use, conspiracies. Some people will use avoidance. Some people will shut down. Some people will go in overactive mode. This is human, okay? All of us will do something different that is like, a way to cope and deal. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to keep working because, I don't have time to stop. You know what I mean? So I'm going to keep holding space for healers. I'm going to keep holding space for the communities. I'm going to keep holding space for the people who want to, serve and be in community right now. That was my way, right? I don't know if that's like a full dissociation, but like that's my coping. That is the way that I showed up during that time. So in terms of spiritual psychosis, a lot of different people have collective psychosis that almost inform the psychosis that you're already going through. So it's one thing if you like personally had a thought, you're like, ooh, what if this was what if this was aliens, right? Like, okay, cool. Like maybe you had like a unique thought, but now in the echo chambers of the internet and how like algorithms work, like you thought it and then TikTok showed you the video, and then like somebody made a YouTube about it, and somebody said it on the Instagram, and then you're like, oh my gosh, like I was not crazy. It really is aliens, like really perpetuating our state and our country with our with this virus, and like you're just like going down that because somebody is repeating back to you and mirroring back to you a spiritual psychosis based thought, right? And so now this is where the collective psychosis happens, is that you are kind of informing each other. Echo chambers is like I say a thing and it echoes, and it reaches your ear, and then you echo it back to me, and we're basically in the same room saying the same thing over and over to each other, and like hearing our own voices get amplified. And there's no room for like somebody else to come shout in that room, and if they do, they're wrong. Right? Like somebody's gonna be like, hey, like what about all the deaths? And like, no, the death doesn't exist, right? Like you're going to like repeat a thing that is being repeated back to you. And so the more that you have evidence for that thing being repeated back to you, the more that you believe that it's true. Okay? Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath, okay? Because this is sometimes a really triggering conversation, because sometimes you just don't know that you participated in it, and sometimes you don't understand the harm and violence that you were experiencing yourself, and perhaps the harm and violence that you were causing other people by being in your spiritual psychosis. So let me backtrack not backtrack, let me like sidetrack and go on a little tangent on, this in my own experience, spiritual psychosis and dissociation in my own experience. So So several years ago, and I may have shared this on the podcast a few times, I was having this thought where I just felt that like if I keep going in this work, in the work that I do in the healing arts, in the work that I do in terms of, somatic and body-based healing and all these different things and all the energy portals that I started feeling like opening up in my body and just the downloads that I was getting, a part of me questioned is like, is this just my projection that I'm getting a download, right? Like I question that all the time. And it's a balance for me to lean into it and also like step back to say like, okay, is this my own projection or is this like a dissociation? Is this a coping? And I think the answer is all of the above, right? Like it's all of the above. So, we'll leave it to that. We don't need to hyperanalyze me right now in that way. But basically a few years ago, I remember talking to my best friend. I was talking on the phone. I remember exactly where I was. I was looking at the moon. I was outside and the breeze, I can smell it. I remember being there. I'm talking on the phone and I said to her and I said, if I keep going, I just know that I can't come back. Like if I go, I knew intuitively that there was going to be a period of time where because my worldview was shifting so fast, so quick, so, dramatically that like, I don't know if I'm going to end up on the other side, like latching onto something like really wild and wacky, or I'm going to come out okay. So I had this awareness that's like, I'm going to go into it knowing that I'm grounded, knowing that I have this awareness. And I think having an awareness that you might experience a little paranoia is a great thing because then you have a better opportunity to kind of address and deal with that paranoia. And so I remember that I was experiencing just like a little bit of paranoia, like when I'm like experiencing ancestors and experiencing downloads and just like hallucinating out of nowhere. And no, I'm not on drugs. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not drug induced. I'm not smoking weed. I'm not on shrooms. I'm not on acid. I'm not on, right? Like there's nothing that is causing that or could be the cause of that. I'm just doing a lot of somatic body work where I feel so much as being awakened and activated. And I don't have the explanation for that. But this awareness that I'm experiencing a little bit of paranoia, I remember talking to my friend. I was just like, if I keep going into it, I know there's no way for me to return back. Like I'm too far in it. I'm at the point where I either jump in or I'm just going to like remain here forever, right? And that is something that a lot of people in your, again, like however you describe it, self-exploration, spiritual healing, personal development world, like when you're doing that work, I think all of us come to that at a certain point and a certain magnitude, right? And you have to make a decision like, no, I actually am going to go through this. I'm going to keep going to breathwork and like crying and doing this work. And I am going to keep, allowing these maybe triggers to come up or memories to come up. And that's a lot, like energetically, that's a lot, but it's like you are brought to the work when you are able to handle and manage that. I don't believe that you're just being like thrown into doing trauma work or thrown into doing somatic work, like when you're not really ready for it. And part of what I say as a facilitator of this kind of work is that if you're not ready, like I'm not going to force you or convince you, you know what I mean? Because then we're not in alignment to you consenting to, awakening the things that are calling to be awakened within you. Like I can't force you to the line. I can't force you to tell you that this is what you need or not need. It's like you make a decision, like you see the results and you see what is possible and you make a decision towards that from your own inner knowing and your own intuition. You shouldn't let facilitators or any coach or mentor like force you into the work. It's like, yeah, you feel ready and your body will tell you. It's not your mind really, it's your body. And so for me, I don't feel like I ever experienced like a full on spiritual psychosis or really been into a space where it's like, oh no, I am like totally wacky, kooky. I cannot come back from this. I really feel that I have awareness enough where I prepped myself and grounded myself to go into the work where I really circumvented that. You know what I mean? And there is a point, it's like, yes, I want to explore different topics. I want to explore, the conspiracies and things like that. Like I love to have an open mind and I'm curious and interested in why people think the way they do. And I'm open to that. I remain open to that. Even though I'm like aliens, like in terms of like COVID, I was like, okay, well, tell me your story, but don't tell it to me in a a way that like totally negates other people's lived experiences of like this not being an alien thing, this being like a true thing that put a lot of bodies into the ground, so tell it to me in a way that you can explore and participate in a conversation while not being totally harmful to the reality of what other people experience or not experience. Okay. And so here's where that psychosis part happens, is that when your brain is searching, right? Like when your brain is in that process of searching for an answer, searching for that explanation. And this is actually how a lot of people join cults too. When you're in this exploration where you don't really feel like you have something to anchor to, you're very vulnerable during this time. And, I'll leave you to it to find your own rabbit hole of going down into cult research. I'm talking very generally that a lot of cult behavior happens and a lot of cult members will approach really vulnerable people. And, it's like somebody realizes that they've been abused their whole life, or, they just came out of a really nasty abusive relationship or something like that. And then all of a sudden you meet this person who says, here's your salvation. We're a community of people who love living on the land and we love taking care of each other. And you're just like, oh my gosh, this is love. Like, this is truly love. I was missing this from my life this whole time. And even if there is like underlines of abuse and sexual abuse, which oftentimes you find in cults, you might actually kind of like bypass that. You're just like, no, this is not abuse. Like, this is love. This is care. This is community. This is, this is part of like how love is expressed. And you might really just be vulnerable to that. And honestly, I witnessed a lot of this. I used to live very close to this really giant Scientology center in Los Angeles. It's this giant, big blue building and like a whole like campus of Scientology. And so there would be all these people around the campus who would be passing around flyers and informational brochures and things like that, and literally like follow you around the block for several blocks and really just not get the hint, you know what I mean? But sometimes they would be stopped and talking to like a person who, was genuinely interested in what Scientology had to offer in terms of like, okay, it gives them a sense of community, it gives them a sense of belonging, gives them a sense of, like purpose. And it's like, okay, some people are just joking around when they're having these conversations, but somebody who's listening and somebody who's having this conversation with a organization that is renownedly known for abuse and renownedly known for some very weird shit and renownedly known for supremacist ideologies, they're preying on a lot of vulnerable people who are seeking a sense of belonging. And I think COVID is like a great example, but there's also like more minor examples. Like that's a big dramatic example because that was like a huge, and continues to be a huge, life event for all of us. Like we're still, we're still in it, like in so many different ways. Like people have long COVID, people have lives that were changed, people had it changed in good ways and negative ways, people lost people, right? Like there's so many different variations of that experience, but there's also micro experiences in your life where you might be dissociating in a very similar way by adhering to thoughts and thought patterns that are just things that your brain is seeking out because it just is looking for an explanation to something. So you might have, a micro example or like, smaller examples outside of COVID, which is like, okay, you might have some kind of thing that happened in your life and you're like, yeah, this is the bigger reason for this is, my karma, because my fifth life that I lived, 10,000 years ago, and I was a high priestess over here, and I was this, angel being over here, and that's my, punishment for this life that I have right now, or that's my reward for this life that I have right now. Like, do you hear like a lot of the psychosis around past life? And I'm not negating past life because like I said, I dance very, very carefully between a lot of different realms. And there is no way that I'm going into one fully and not being able to come back. And I say this to you too, right? So it's not to say that I do not believe in past lives because I have seen mine in lots of different ways. And I have seen also future lives as well. I've also seen my present life, you know what I mean? But then it's also like, is this my projection? Is this my own personal projection? Am I being influenced by certain things? Am I kind of just like trying to hype myself up and being like, ooh, I was a warrior and this, like Lemurian, forest colony of like all women, like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, is that a projection or like what's going on? You know what I mean? And so sometimes like your brain is imaginative, it's creative, it's creating stories in order to, like help you make sense of what it is that you're experiencing in this life form. on earth in this life form, in this flesh body. So part of it's like, yeah, go experience a little bit of dissociation, because I do totally believe that there's healthy dissociation. You'll never catch me saying that one thing is good and one thing is bad. I'm like, yeah, just a little bit of that. You know what I mean? Like there's healthy dissociation, right? Like we do this, like, yeah, maybe we're just going to dissociate by just like watching a lot of TV today. Okay. Don't make that your entire year's personality, but like, okay, sure. Like do a little bit of that. Like maybe you play a little hooky and be irresponsible and do something like, okay, you know what I mean? A little dissociation can be super, super healthy for us. But now if you're dissociating in order to kind of make sense of your current life and current situation, a lot of the stories that people are telling are coming from people who feel totally unempowered in their present life. And you'll start to notice, and now that I've said this, start to notice like all the folks who are just like, yeah, I'm a high priestess, or I'm this, like I have this kind of, ranking within this alien society, or I have been contacted and I've been chosen for the Federation of the Alien Galactic, and I have, the reptilians, Okay, cool. Like you're a high-ranking officer there. Sure, cool. But now when you come back into the life, like, and it's really difficult for you to exist on your day-to-day, you're experiencing spiritual psychosis. You know what I mean? Like you're experiencing a form of like storytelling that helps you kind of cope and deal with the things that are, like more fantastical, like having like a more fantastical reason for your life sometimes just makes you feel better about like what it is that you're presently experiencing, which might be, a really terrible divorce, and really, you're disconnected from your children and you're going through like financial troubles, and there's like things just don't feel so abundant. So to say that like you're a high-ranking officer in this like alien federation sometimes is just like, it gives you hope. Like in long story short, it gives you hope. Okay. And so when you truly, like within every single body, in like every single fiber, every single bone of your body, like believe that story to be true, it makes it hard for you to exist in here too. In the present too, right? Because those are other realms, and like perhaps you are, like perhaps, like I should be saluting you because you're a high-ranking officer in this galactic fighter. Like maybe maybe I'm wrong. You know what I mean? Like maybe I was not chosen, and so I don't understand like what it means to be chosen like you. Maybe I don't get it, right? Like so I'm open to that being true, and I'll pay the price when I need to pay the price for that, right? Like so maybe I won't be spared when the aliens come and like I was not being nice to you because I said like meh to you on the podcast. You know what I mean? So that would be my karma. So I'll deal with mine when it comes to that. But that's the thing. It's like you have to laugh about it. And that's the joke of it all. So time comes that we take another deep breath, inhale and exhale, relax. Okay. So maybe you're picking up what I'm throwing down is that maybe you're picking up that if you're somebody who's already prone to addiction, addictive thinking, mental illness, neurodivergency, or you have, a history of trauma, whether it's big T or little t, big trauma, little trauma, a lot of these things are exaggerated, right? Like they are more amplified when you're experiencing the psychosis, because now you're just like, I don't know if it's because I'm bipolar, or if this is a manic episode, or if this is depression, or if this is my like addiction of addictive thinking, or am I codependent, right? Like there's so many different like clinical language that we can put into that. And I really want to like steer clear from saying any kind of like clinical diagnosis or like helping you get any kind of clinical diagnosis. That's not my role here. We're talking about spiritual psychosis, right? So there's so much other things that can contribute to why this very common occurrence of your brain wanting to latch onto an explanation can get more amplified and more magnified if you are somebody with a mental illness, or you have, addiction or addictive thinking, or you're somebody who struggles with codependency. There might be more struggles and complexities with how spiritual psychosis can get processed and the way that you're experiencing it, right? So one of the best ways to talk about this is really just to acknowledge the types of disassociation that you participate with. And it's kind of just as simple as make a list, write it down. Like, what are your belief systems? What do you think, And maybe it's controversial and you truly believe it's true. Write it down, right? And then explore, like, why do I believe that? And I recommend that you do something I call the 6 layers of why, which is anytime you answer a why, ask it again 6 times. It's a total of 6 times. So if you say, yeah, I believe this because, okay, and then why do you believe that? Okay. And then why do you believe that? Do that 6 times until you get to the root of this. Because one of the uncomfortable truths of exploring a lot of people's spiritual psychosis, and I'm saying this from my personal experience of holding space for a lot of people in the healing journey, in their self-development, in their personal development, in their self-exploration, and kind of evading them going into spiritual psychosis, is that a lot of spiritual psychosis is rooted in white supremacy. I know you don't want to hear that, and I know that you don't want me to go on like my whole tangent and rant and all this kind of stuff, but white supremacy ideologies often take away agency from yourself. So I'm going to return to these conversations about pandemic and COVID, where a lot of the dissociation and the conspiracy to alt-right pipeline really is rooted in white supremacy. It was from a ability to talk about things from such a place of privilege and to negate that a lot of different people around the world don't have the same resources and the tools. And some of the things that people said weren't real were the tangible reality for a lot of people, like death, and like not having resources and not having vaccines and not having X, Y, and Z different things. These were very privileged conversations to have from a lot of different people who tended to follow a lot of white supremacist ideologies. So they started to talk about Aryan races. They talk about alien, blonde hair, blue eyed aliens who were coming. It's like, does that sound familiar to anything that happened in Germany at any point? You know what I mean? Like there's all these different ideologies that have these like undertones. And some people are explicitly saying their supremacy theories out loud. And some people are kind of like saying it between the lines. You have to read between the lines. They're saying it with an undertone of that. Like even conspiracies around the pyramids, right? A lot of people are like, okay, these are alien structures that were alien built, because who started these theories? They were white supremacists. These were colonizers who came into indigenous lands, and they couldn't figure out how any of these like grandiose structures were made, and they didn't understand that these people had math, and they didn't understand like specifically in the Middle East during those times, like there was so much studies around mathematics, and so many different cultures around the world were studying stars and like measuring things in very complex ways. And so when settlers came into these lands and the colonizers came into these lands, they looked at these grandiose structures and they could not fathom who would have built these grandiose structures, because of course black people couldn't have done it, brown people couldn't have done it, these savage people couldn't have done it, right? Like all these people that were thought as less than. So these theories started to get explored and perpetrated more and more and more, to the point that it took away agency of the people who maybe did put these things into the ground and maybe did build these things, so it's possible for people to build the Colosseum, but it's not possible for people to build pyramids. Like it's possible for people to do these things, but it's not possible, right? Like there is an undertone of supremacy that you may not actually have looked at, because this just feels like, like you're just innocently exploring a conspiracy and you're just innocently looking at a thing. But look at that. Like look at the roots of where that conspiracy came from, who started it, their beliefs and their thought patterns, and you're going to see that there's some like really wacky shit going on there. There's going to be some very supremacist thinking that have been diluted to the point where you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just like innocently thinking about this like alien theory, but without truly understanding like where it actually comes from. But I digress on that topic, because we're talking about the spiritual psychosis. Now, one of the things that I want to point out, amongst the 900 things that we've already talked about here, is that this is a huge red flag on your healing journey. When you are so attached to what you believe is the absolute truth, right? And one of the most exciting and most frustrating things about life is the understanding that there is no absolute truth. Like there is only truth based on the evidence that we find. And that means that there needs to be a willingness to change your mind when there's different evidence. This is true for science. This is true for scientific inquiry. This is true for people who don't identify as scientists. And just like, if you have an evidence for something different, then you have to be able to adjust your thought process to match the evidence. And of course, you're not going to trust all evidence for everything because, in science, when you provide evidence within a certain amount of statistical confidence. So you never really say like by 100%, we're sure that this is true. It's to say that we are 99.99998%, but there's that 0.0002% that could be, that could tell us otherwise, but we're pretty sure about this. That's how like scientific research is done too. And so you see about like, our understanding of the earth and the cosmos. We used to think that the sun goes around the earth, and like there was great evidence for that to be true until there wasn't, right? Like until there was other evidence that said that something else might be true. Yeah, and even, Copernicus, who said like, hey, maybe the sun does not go around the earth because like of these, uniform circles and these stars appear here, there, and there. And there was all this like more evidence, and he got like, he got ostracized. Like the religious communities and a lot of different scientific and religious circles around that time had a problem with him. They were just like, no, that's just how it is. And that's just how we know it. And that's just the way it is. And like, they were not really willing to like truly look at the piece of evidence that has like informed the model that we have now about like our understanding of the solar system and stars and galaxies and things like that. So I digress with my additional tangent on that. But returning back to our topic, which is this idea of spiritual psychosis, sometimes you may recognize when you're about to experience it. And none of us are immune to that. The most grounded, the most reason-headed, the most X, Y, and Z different things, because we all have so many different things that change the way that we view life, right? Like we experience so many different things that have the potential to like really make us dissociate. Loss of people, heartache, war, genocide, capitalism, racism, sexism, loss of any kind. Like there's so many different things that is going to change you, and you just never know like what your energetic body and what your, mental state is going to start to grasp onto. And this is so human of all of us. So I really believe this, and this is like my personal projection belief, that I really believe that none of us are really immune to it, and like if you have the best circle and you have the best thing and you have and you still say like, oh, that person went off the deep end, or like that person went off, right? Like, and I think a lot of people, when they're in spiritual psychosis, it can just resemble so many other mental illnesses. It can resemble so many other things. And like I mentioned earlier, that like there might be overlap, like there might be an overlap of like an actual mental illness taking place, and also part of that mental illness kind of being amplified because you're in the spiritual psychosis. So our natural need is explanation. So think about Earth, like think about world, think about the history of humans. Like we've always have been curious. We always want answers. We always ask why. We are so curious. We want to study. We want, right? Like it is ingrained in our neurology to ask why. Like from a good place and a bad place. Like it's too much, like in kids, like imagine kids, like they're always asking you, they're just so curious, and like this natural curiosity is sometimes dangerous when it comes to like seeking answers, right? So like when you're changing your worldview, your mind is still like, oh, but I don't have an explanation for this anymore. I don't know about this anymore. Like what am I latching onto? So it's like spinning, it's spiraling, it's spinning and spiraling. And it just like grasps onto the first easiest thing that you'll give it, And so it does take a little bit of mental fortitude, I think, in order to say like, yep, aliens, but like don't grasp to that. Like, let's come back home. Like, let's come back like, oh, okay, conspiracy. Okay, cool. But let's not grasp onto it, right? So this gives you the ability to stay open-minded, right? You see, like that is like at the at the core of this, it's great to have strong beliefs. It's great to have critical thinking. It's great to have an opinion and like solidify your thought, but it's also equally as great to kind of leave room for interpretation, have the possibility to change your mind. And so you'll see a lot of the psychosis take place in a lot of religious communities, because it's like, that's the truth and that's just the truth because the book said so. It's like, okay, but are you open to the possibility of like this not being true? Because that's true science, like anytime you write any kind of, thesis or hypothesis, you say, I believe this to be true. And I also accept the null hypothesis. Like I also accept that there is a possibility where this isn't true. And could I be okay either way? Right. So like, I'm going to look for the evidence in the most neutral way that I can. And if the evidence is not what I wanted, like not what I was expecting or not what my thesis was or my hypothesis was, I can't lie about the fact that I found evidence to support the other, right? Like I can't just say I didn't find the other things that completely negated what I thought was going to be true. I still have to go with what is evidented, right? And so that is the openness. And it's like frustrating because like I wanted to find evidence for this, like I wanted to, like that was the whole point of it, but like I didn't find it. But if I found the opposite of that to be true, then I also have to accept that. And that is like, that's the nature of life, where part of your spiritual psychosis, and I'm talking like in academic terms there, but part of your spiritual psychosis is the ability to say like, if I'm only lashing onto like one possibility, I'm not leaving room for that possibility to be complete false. Because another thing that we see is that latch on, because you're just like, this conspiracy sounds great. But you're not calling it conspiracy. You're just like, that's the truth. The government is lying to us and the aliens downloaded and my ancestors, and because I'm the highest priestess of this lineage of, the mermaid crew and blah, blah, blah. And like, so you like so totally believe that. And then all of a sudden you hear somebody, they're like, actually this mermaid crew never existed, and this like federation was actually, you thought there was this alien federation, but in the 1980s, like they disbanded. And so now you're like, oh my God, like my whole identity that I built around this, like, this like storytelling now, like I'm going to fall again. You know what I mean? So like, don't go through that up and down, up and down, up and down. It's to say like, how can I remain just conscientious enough? Because like I struggle with like telling anybody to be like, oh, realistic, you know what I mean? Because like I don't believe that to be true either. There is no part of like anything that I can ever say to you is like real or unreal. It is just like my evidence. So, and it's your evidence. So if that's real for you, then like, okay, cool, like let's go, And so this is just like the balance that you're going to ask yourself. And part of what I said to you earlier about like my own conversation that I was having with my friend is like, I had this understanding that like I'm about to go into something and I might not really be able to fully come out like sane on the other side. You know what I mean? And I might be okay with that. I'm not saying this is it's a good or bad or positive or negative thing, but it's just like, I just knew that like my brain chemistry was going to change and my worldview was going to change once I go into, kind of like a portal. Like you go into this work and you understand like you're experiencing paranoia, you're doing this thing and that thing. And then that's where like you humanize yourself, you are still at the end of the day a human existing here. So even if you have a ton of, accolades and high ranking in your mermaid colony, come back to the human colony. And you see this in a lot of like war movies, right? Or, let's say The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That has a lot of religious undertones, but even just that whole movie is about like, yeah, let's go into a wardrobe because like we're literally experiencing war and famine. You know what I mean? And there's like this whole creative, story that happens there. Or like Pan's Labyrinth and so many different stories, and specifically with kids, it's like it's so much easier and nicer when you go into like a fantastical world and the secret garden, and you know what I mean? Like there's all this like there's so much more beauty and magic and adventure. And especially for children, especially when you feel like you're so curious and you're so childlike, like all of these different things are just so much more exciting than like, oh man, I gotta go to work, like I gotta go participate in this shit, like, and I have to, put on a bra, and I have to, like drive my car, and I have to figure out what I'm gonna eat. Like all this shit is so boring. And when I want to really be flying around in like a narwhal and like eating chips, like that sounds better than like this life, And so I don't blame you for dissociation. Don't blame yourself for dissociation. Just hoping that, having a conversation about spiritual psychosis and kind of just planting it on your radar will help you just be a little bit more grounded in, the thoughts that you attach yourself, the belief systems that you're participating in, the way that you're kind of, formulating your own opinions and your own ideologies, and really just looking at all of this stuff from like a lens of supremacy, and just understanding like, am I kind of deconstructing that for myself as I am doing this work as well. Okay. So, should I leave you with a tip on how to like get out of spiritual psychosis? Get in your body. You have to be in your physical body in order to not be up in your head so much, easier said than done, but do practices like breath work, do yoga, move, dance, come do flow breath work, come shake ass, like make some time to like listen to music and just like get into that. Exercise, work out, go outside. All of these different things is just the existence of your physical body. And the more disconnected you are from movement and truly allowing yourself to have feelings that are here, and sometimes those things are incredibly disgustingly uncomfortable to feel, you're just like, oh my gosh, I hate feeling all these things. So I'm going to go into like my, my Delulu world because that's nicer over there. It's like, go there for a little bit, you know what I mean? Like go there for a little bit, come back though, come back, move your body, and then like, receive the information, receive the downloads. But then at the end of the day, we're existing in this flesh, we're existing in this body. So let's move our bodies, okay? And especially if you're somebody who does a lot of work in spiritual realms, if you are somebody who astral travels or opens, Akashic records, or you do a lot of hypnosis or time travel, quantum level work, you gotta get it together. You have to literally figure out how you can be in your physical body a lot more than you think you need to. Okay. Well, I hope this episode sparked something within you. Go ahead and screenshot this episode and tag me on your stories on Instagram at shanila.satar and let me know what it is that you took away from this conversation. And of course, if you're curious to study the healing arts, you want to become a certified sound healer or a certified breathwork facilitator, head to www.alwaysplay.org and you can find all the details about joining me and other healing arts practitioners who are totally avoiding spiritual psychosis because we're doing the embodied and grounded work together. And just remember, the world is your playground. And until next time, I will catch you soon.